This presentation is a follow-on to what I presented about a year ago in Washington on the deep national security state and the UFO and extraterrestrial issue. So this is very, very bad news. And I'm not saying that to be at all melodramatic. I'm telling you what the truth is. And the only reason I'm doing this is that there have been information coming in, pinging my system, indicating that we're getting closer to the hoaxing of events to stampede the world into something that would make 9/11 look like a picnic. And there are a number of signs that have been mounting on this issue over the last 6 to 9 months. My goal here, using that medical analogy a little further, is to avoid the attack. And in this case, it would not be a medical emergency. It would be a national security and global emergency orchestrated by people who have been planning this since the 1950s. So what I'm going to be discussing is what in the parlance of the Pentagon, CIA, counterintelligence programs is known as a false INW. Pop culture, we call it false flag. Some years ago, I had a meeting with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and General Patrick Hughes, and the focus of that briefing, which was quite extensive, was to give him information so that he would not be deceived in the event of a false or deceptive INW, indication and warning, dealing with the UFO and ET issue. As it turned out, the general had no knowledge of either the UFO issue, the extraterrestrial issue, or the fact that there was already afoot, planned since the 1950s, a program, a longitudinal, long-term, multi-generational program to hoax a threat from outer space when there was none, or is none. At least 21 levels, compartments, past the level of the president. 21 levels. That you have a permanent infrastructure that has evolved or spun off from the legitimate government, but that is embedded within the corporate sector, the intelligence community, and the military sector, that has run amok viciously of our liberties and our freedoms, and have therefore been given no oversight or restraints so that they could set up a dynamic where they could hoax an alien attack on planet Earth. The cosmic false flag that I want to talk about is the crown jewel of the secrecy that was hatched in the 50s that led to Eisenhower losing control of these programs. And no president since that time has had full operational access control. They've had knowledge, but not control over these rogue elements. So now we're 60 years into a period where these operations have run amok, so much so that it has become an existential threat to life on Earth. And this is something we have to understand what the modus operandi is. What are the means for achieving this goal? And I was asked today by a gentleman I was meeting with, he says, when do you think they might do this? I say they began in 1950-something. It's already happened. It's already happened. The false flag has already happened. Now, not the crescendo moment, not the final act, all right? But acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, have already transpired. What do I mean by that? What I mean is these operations figured out that the psychological warfare value of this subject was such that they could set up events that are completely hoaxed, beginning in the 50s and 60s, that would convince people that those events were of extraterrestrial origin, alien, when they were not. And so blur the lines between the actual ET activity and the human stagecraft, as it's called, that most people, including people at the White House, wouldn't know the difference. These false flag operations, and I do like the term deceptive indication and warning, very military, very precise. Do you think this is the first time this has happened? You ever heard of something called the Vietnam War? How many people heard of Vietnam War? And so they hoaxed an event, or exaggerated an event, called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And the Gulf of Tonkin, basically what we did, we hoaxed and exaggerated the attack on our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, there near Vietnam, so that it would cause outrage in the public, outrage in Congress, and it stampeded President Johnson into vastly expanding our presence in Vietnam. Which of course enriched, guess who? The military, industrial, financial, gang-bankster complex. So trillions of dollars are at stake here. So, and it happened to cost 58,000 American lives and probably several million Southeast Asian lives on a misadventure that was completely based on a hoaxed or an exaggerated event. You ever heard of something called 9/11? Who was alive when that happened? Any children here not alive? I've talked to some people. Well, when 9/11 happened, and I don't want to go too far into this, except to say I have a gentleman who was the third highest ranking man at the Naval Research Labs, who prior to 9/11, in the Vice President's office, Vice President Cheney's, saw all the plans for 9/11 prior to it occurring. He's deceased, since I'm talking about it now. I did not talk about it for years. And he was told, I used to stay at my home. He said, look, I was told my wife and my children, my grandchildren would be killed along with me if I ever mentioned this. He took it to his grave, gave me the information. God bless him, Rick Foch, who was a very high-ranking scientist, an aerospace figure in the Naval Research Labs, which is the biggest Department of Defense lab. We only need gaze back from Vietnam to today to see the extent to which these false flag operations, hoaxed events, exaggerated threats can stampede a populace and the Congress and the presidency into very dangerous and bad decisions. Now, the mother lode, the sort of the crown jewel of that kind of event is what has been planned assiduously since the 1950s, and that is a threat from outer space that is alien, that would unite the world around a military junta, a militarism, that would put all of humanity together, but against one or more extraterrestrial races. Now that plan, which they came up with in the 1950s, has been very carefully rolled out. I mean, this is, if you were to rank this on a scale of 1 to 10 of sensitive, compartmented intelligence, information, this is as high as it goes, 10. Now, I've had it confirmed, and it's going to be in our movie Unacknowledged. And by the way, all of you who contributed that, thank you very much. It's going forward well. We have to have it finished in about a month and then released late winter, early spring 2017. So one of the people that's going to be in this movie is an Air Force Office of Special Investigations counterintelligence officer who confirms the false flag. Name, rank, serial number. Confirms the military's involvement in staging the abductions of humans, making it look alien. Confirms that he carried bags of cash to people in the mainstream media to influence stories and coverage of this issue. But this needs to get out now because we have a new president coming in. That's why I'm here. And it's rolling down the track. This plan is on track. Man-made, anti-gravity, going all the way back to the late 50s and 60s. Triangular, disc, boomerang, etc. So the globe today is a Fourth Reichian fascist order. Now, I say this with no pleasure, and I am not speaking hyperbole. And that is the problem. It's a very huge problem. And there are all kinds of actors and players that have glommed on to that agenda. A bizarre collection of people from different walks of life and different agendas. They have been wanting a certain acculturation around UFOs and ETs for the purpose of having the public think that it could be true, but they don't really know what it is. So right now, more than half the public, over this longitudinal, long-term psychological propaganda warfare program launched in the 50s, believe UFOs are real. They believe there's intelligent life in the universe. But that's about where the granular knowledge ends. There's not a lot of granular knowledge, detailed knowledge of what all this is. There's another category, and this is more difficult to understand, and that is electromagnetic assets. And these include electromagnetic systems that could optically, like a very advanced hologram, simulate an event. Electromagnetic systems that have been called popularly electronic warfare systems that are psychotronic and radionic that interface with consciousness and thought. And electromagnetic systems that can affect large segments of the population when targeted. Now, these began to be developed quite in an advanced fashion by the 40s and 50s. And by 1956, it had been accomplished to the point of state-of-the-art. If you use that pop culture term of UFO, there are two types. Man-made ones here, interstellar extraterrestrial ones here. What's out there that humans control is fearsome and awesome. And unfortunately, to the lay person or to the average general, admiral, or president, is indistinguishable from an extraterrestrial object in their mind. So that is really the danger point. That is where you have the risk of you being able to take these objects that are 100% man-made and, for example, this boomerang flying object seen through around the Hudson Valley, I believe this one, and the Hudson Valley events and the reported up and down, I think it was 88, something like that. And people got right up underneath it. Look what's underneath. Can you see that? Little tubes and structures and grids and what have you. That's not extraterrestrial. That's man-made. Probably out of the Boeing Phantom Works out of Seattle. And they were just seeing what the public would do. So people were stopped on the freeway reporting it. Tens of thousands of people saw these. Silent. A little bit of a humming sound, like a transformer. 100% man-made. 100% fooled everyone looking at it. Thought it was E.T. This is what I'm saying. The false flag's already happened. But they've been beta testing the system with these kinds of events. Another one that was reported are the big flying triangles, 200-300 feet across. Remember these? Belgium, other places. Look underneath. So these have been reported, and they have a grid structure, very manufactured, very man-made. Silent, except for a little bit of a humming sound when you're close. Electromagnetogravitics, floats along. Now, here's another layer of confusion that I didn't get a chance to share this with Mr. Schratt. There are extraterrestrial objects that look like and approximate the man-made ones. Now you want to get a little more confused. Consider that if there's an extraterrestrial event that happens, they will then put up a man-made one, and they'll hoax a man-made event piggybacking on an extraterrestrial one, just to really confuse the picture. And that's happened many, many times. And there's a plethora of these that are very strange looking. This is another one. You see the structure? It's reported in a case. Now, Mr. Schratt has collected the best eyewitness documents of these at close range from people, and then done models and drawings and what have you, and they're excellent. And these are all man-made. Now, to anyone who would casually see this, and then objects that were very similar to what was seen in the Phoenix lights, these sort of objects. You know, a fraction of a mile across. Also, can be, not always are, can be human man-made ones. There's an entire history of aerospace research and development that's now 62 years on, using technologies that are having to do with mass cancellation, anti-gravity. And those have been deployed purposely so that it'll get into the media and thousands of people will see it, and it will either hide an extraterrestrial event and overwhelm it, or it will simply be a way of them testing the system to see what will the people say, what will the media say, how are they going to react, and then they can refine their algorithm, their protocol for how to do the hoax down the road. This is how they refine the false flag over a 60-year period. This understanding is key. Otherwise, everyone's going to assume anything that we don't understand that zips around is extraterrestrial. Moreover, anything that would come over and do an Independence Day attack, boom, is extraterrestrial, when it isn't. It is not. It is absolutely not. It's all a lie. It's the biggest hoax in human history, and you've got to wake up to this. If we had known that we had hoaxed the Gulf of Tonkin, and could we have avoided Vietnam? If we had known about 9/11 in advance, or the hoaxing of the weapons of mass destruction materials about Iraq, could we have avoided that disaster? So now they have the ability to hoax events that really, even more so, look extraterrestrial, but are man-made. Very dangerous business. Now, this is why the President-elect and the Congress and the National Military Command Center and the Director of the CIA and the Secretary of Defense and the generals on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, most of whom will never be read into what I'm sharing, need to know this. They have a need to know. And so do you, the public, so you're not fooled. Don't be fooled again. There is a group that has malice aforethought and has planned to launch these assets in a way that would look like 100% like an attack on our planet or on human assets, calling it alien when it's being run by people. I call it the Wizard of Oz. So you have these guys, you know, it's like the Wizard of Oz, remember at the end, they pull the curtain back and there's this old crudmudgeon pulling all the levers, scaring the hell out of Dorothy. And I call it the Wizard of Oz effect. But it's very sophisticated, and we should not underestimate their capacity. We had this capability I'm telling you about today in November of 2016, and that all they would have to do is push a button, boom, and the entire event would roll out. And he said everyone on planet Earth would be fooled. Now, if I had heard that only from one person, I would have discounted it as madness. I've heard it from one person after another, after another, after another, after another, on a granular level. What happens then when you have a black operation that is so secretive that they could pull off a stunt like this? It means they could stampede the entire world into an Independence Day, like the movie, event. Has this already been beta tested? Yes. So they beta tested and have been testing on the public sightings that are man-made UFOs, often piggybacking on sightings of actual ET craft, so that people are confused, don't have any discernment. They've also been involved in using first the stagecraft of little people, and I mean no offense to short people. I know sometimes people get prickly when I talk about this, I'm 6'4", but special operations folks who are under 5 feet and with certain makeup and masks on these anti-gravities who would go then and abduct people. So there have been abduction squads, which are also confirmed by this Air Force intelligence officer, that have been operative for decades. And when it has suited the intelligence community, they have engaged in human abductions that 100% fool those poor victims who really think they were abducted by an ET. And they weren't, but it sure looks like it. Now there are two modalities used here. The aircraft itself, which is an anti-grav. The stagecraft initially were special operations personnel who now they have robotic ones that look actually like certain species of ETs, the extraterrestrial biological entities in the EBINs. But they're man-made. I know several people who worked on making these creatures, and they've been called programmed life forms. But they have integrated circuits in their neural complex. They're 100% man-made. But they would absolutely fool 99.999999 to out to 100 decimal points. Anyone in the public that it was extraterrestrial. Those are fully operational, have been for decades. The early ones were these more clumsy attempts. It's also done in association with electromagnetic weapon systems that alter awareness, can make you black out. And also certain chemicals, drugs, canisters that'll be thrown and the person will then pass out, have no memory of what happened, and then awaken with this other event happen, having been abducted by an extraterrestrial. And because of what has been happening with the WikiLeaks, with John Podesta's emails about UFOs, the New York Times reporting on Hillary's interest in it, which this was a red line subject, the mainstream media starting to report it, they are being unleashed. To me, there are signs out there that this false flag hoaxing of an attack on the planet is closer than it's been in 22 years that I've been involved. If you have trillions of dollars and the kind of technologies I've been referring to, and you have the intent to masquerade and simulate an alien contact abduction event, you can do it. So that is one of the chief issues that we have to begin to think about. What part of what we hear about in the UFO and internet and movies and books is ET, interstellar? What part is counterintelligence and propaganda and conditioning events by the intelligence community and by the deep, 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 darkest parts of this rogue community that have betrayed the United States and every other country on earth? Well, I'm telling you that their stagecraft, as they call it, is so good that there are very few people who would not be deceived by it. Which means that we have to approach every account we hear, every event that happens, with extraordinary, scrupulous skepticism. And we are not being skeptical enough. We need to understand that if we can put out a warning call, all of you listening, to our friends, our neighbors, we can perhaps avert this disaster. And because putting the sunshine on this and exposing it neutralizes the threat. There's no element of surprise if we come out with information, and more people do, like Mr. Schratt, showing what these aircraft that men are making at the Skunk Works and at Northrop and at Boeing are, and what their capabilities are. If you know they exist, you won't be fooled by them. If you don't know they exist, you will. I know who some of these folks are, and they will stop at nothing to see that people are convinced that there is a threat, as Ronald Reagan said at the United Nations, that we should unite against and fight, to unite the world around. And all I have to say is that if the future is that future, you might as well dig a hole and climb in it. So we better wake up and understand that the information that is out there has to get looked at from many perspectives. This sort of information, in a way, that would redound to whom? The military, industrial, gangbangster, global complex of fascists that are desperate to have World War III be interplanetary. We won't be fooled again. And that if someone tries to stage an event, we're all going to call it out as the hoax that it is, and not go along with that, what I'm calling scripted Armageddon. They would love to see a shutdown of our civilization and the extermination of about 5 billion people through a conflict that they will stage. And they will manufacture Armageddon. And that's the big, deep plan that has been in place since the 50s.